Okay, today is the 12th of June, 2023, and we'll talk about an important German architect, Oswald Mathias Ungers. He was born on June 12th, and this is the reason we talk about him today. Just a second, I want to move forward, and here we are. So Oswald Mathias Ungers, born the 12th of July 1926 and died on September 30th 2007, was a German architect and architectural theorist known for his rationalist designs and the use of cubic or cubical forms. Among his notable projects are museums in Frankfurt, Hamburg, and Cologne. This I took from Wikipedia, but the truth is he built many other buildings, and I would say that maybe some of other programs that he served through his the buildings are even more impressive than the museums that were mentioned in this note on Wikipedia. This was the man, a serious architect, perhaps a little bit too serious. Because it's my belief that play and playfulness are part of architecture and part of creativity. And without sufficient playfulness, although he was playful as well, and we'll comment on his playfulness when the time comes. So what I'm trying to say is that even the superfluous is sometimes necessary. And just rigor and reason are not enough. Here he is with a bust sculpted work of Schinkel, the great 19th century German architect. Perhaps the picture was intentionally crafted in this way to establish some kind of desired contact, if not competition, between Schinkel and Ungers. Well, both very important architects in Germany, but I would say that Schinkel even more so than Oswald Mathias Ungers. Anyway, some drawings by Oswald Mathias Ungers. Now, would you call this very drawing that we started with, as being rational or rationalistic? Yes, he uses the square in plan, but it's an utopian drawing, so it's an idealized form of architecture, using indeed, the square and the so-called rational forms, but it's an idealized form of architecture. And so is this one. I think most architects would not consider what we look at here as a rationalist architecture or as a rational architecture. Actually, I find it almost alarmingly irrational. So what I'm trying to say, if you use just 90 degrees angles and right angles, doesn't mean necessarily that you are rational. You could be obsessed by rectangularity and then right angle, but obsession is not something that normally should be called or could be called rational. So you could be irrational if you are extreme in your choice of, stringent straight lines and, 90 degrees angles and so on. Even here, what we see is actually only on the right side is his work, but even this drawing is highly idealistic. Here is the project of Miss van der Rohe for a skyscraper which he didn't build in Berlin. So this part of this drawing belongs to Miss, and this is what Oswald Mathias Ungers proposed. But I don't know if he was a student, or I imagine he was a young architect at that time trying to have his voice heard. Here again, is this a rational architecture? It depends what we understand by rational. Maybe a truly rational architecture is an architecture which is flexible enough and mature enough and wise enough to also accept uh, accidents, so-called accidents, even some fluidities. Maybe that is true, a truer meaning of the word rational. If you are, in an obsessional way, concerned only with the, symmetry and right angles and so on, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily rational. You could be mad actually in a Cartesian mode. This house, at the beginning, he actually built some houses which are more flexible and more, in a way, more human, if I am to express myself in a non-academical way. 1958, 1959, House Ungers 1 in Cologne, in Köln, or near Köln, but no pictures. But we are going to see the next one here. This house that Oswald Mathias Ungers built, it's even romantic in a certain way, and even the play with the volumes is not, this is not usually when we think about a rational or rationalistic architecture, we think about a house that is inhibiting, but this is not an inhibiting architecture at all. And I find it actually very skillfully done, interesting, and is more than acceptable. I think it's almost romantic in a certain way. Yes, cubical it uses the cubistic mode of expression, but with a certain degree of freedom. And here we see, it's done with bricks. I think it's a very fine house, and it's a house which I wouldn't call rationalistic or even rational, even if maybe it's more rational than later works, which are much more, stringent about certain aspects of their aesthetics. I like this house that he built for himself. Usually, when you have this kind of architecture, you don't use the brick. But the fact that he used the brick shows a certain mental and a certain psychic disposition that is not that of a rationalistic architect. The brick itself being clay, being lut in Romanian. It's clay. It's earth. It's organic. The brick is an organic construction element, and yeah. Anyway, the model is as it is, nothing glorious. Another house by Oswald Mathias Ungers. This one again is, I think, because the walls are woven with small constructive entities. And, yes, the geometry is as it is, but the diagonal is in itself, a sign of rebellion, if you want, or innovation, or, betrayal of the stringencies of the rational paradigm. I like this house as well. And I think the early houses by Oswald Mathias Ungers show some promise, which maybe later became a little bit obscure. But even his later work, you are going to see, has values which make it, not quite easily accepting the qualification of being rationalistic. We are going to see very soon what I'm trying to say. These are fine houses that Oswald Mathias Ungers did, and they do show the skill of a talented architect, and with a sensitivity which is maybe not so easily found even these days. Now, again, would you call this house a rationalistic house with that lush nature all around it? But it's not just the nature. Again, it's the choice of the materials that he employed, and also there is a certain, movement in the articulation of all the parts that compose the house. Unfortunately, I think it was demolished. I took this picture. I don't know German, but I do know the word scandal. I don't know exactly why he scandalized the neighbors. Well, I guess because of the modern language, but Germany should have known by the time when this was built that modernity triumphed in many quarters. And this is what became of the house. Can you believe it? Now, it's actually, we can talk about the reason. Was this reasonable to transform this house into this? Strangely, people probably destroyed it in this very irrational way in the name of reason. You see, this is what happens. In the name of reason, we become immensely unreasonable, not to say alarmingly irrational. Please do not neglect, that such events could happen, even to your buildings, when you are going to build them. The world is mad, and you see here an example. I mean, I thought of Oswald Mathias Ungers when he witnessed, this mutilation of what he did. Now, the German Architecture Museum in Frankfurt, 1979, 1984, we are already entering, in fact, the glorious postmodernist period in the architecture of the world. And in my opinion, it was a disaster, postmodernism. Unfortunately, fortunately, he worked within an existing building, and he just worked inside the building. It's an architecture museum, so we can talk about this too. What does it mean, an architecture museum? It's a museum which displays models, projects, which instead of being outside of the museum as real buildings, are inside the museum as often just that, projects. It's a famous museum, and it's too bad that it's so white, as you can see. He built a house within a house, and now we are approaching that phase in his work where he is not any longer, able to escape almost a metaphysical desire for symmetry and order and control, total control, which could have its positive aspects as well, but also negative ones. Again, we see the greed. It, again, in my opinion, this is idealism. It is idealism that is, employing a so-called rational system of manifesting itself. But in essence, it's a quest for the absolute, for the infinite. It's idealism, but it's an idealism which could fall very easily into sickness. Maybe all idealism, if pushed too far away, like Icarch getting too close to the sun and having his wings melt down. 1980, 1983 is this, rather tall building. I don't know. At that time, some other architects built it this way. I'm thinking of Giorgio Grassi in Italy. It was a way of handling office buildings in an architecture that had some kind of longing for triumphalist past architecture. You know, the triumphal arch, the building like a triumphal arch, but in essence it's an office building, and I don't know how triumphant the office work should be allowed to be. Anyway, square windows, you know, like in Aldo Rossi. I think it was a trembling humanity at that time, afraid that another century will end, and not just another century, but another millennium. And I lived through that time, and I know how it was. For example, I attended a conference at Columbia University in New York in 1990, which was called Afterwards. Already there was a sense of malaise, a sense of a threshold difficult to step over, the threshold afterwards, as if, you know, some kind of a fatal event was going to happen, and if we survived, we could have whispered the word afterwards. It was a very strange time, you know. I remember very well, and I even wrote a kind of an essay called Afterwards, because there were some of the most important architects of that time in the Avery Hall at Columbia University in New York on that day. Rem Koolhaas, Bernard Tschumi, Kenneth Frampton, Peter Eisenman, and others. And there was indeed a darkness in the air. Postmodernism came a little bit prior to that, and then stepped in deconstructivism. So you had these two movements, postmodernism and deconstruction or deconstructivism, which both manifested themselves at the end of the 20th century. In this work and a few others around this time, Oswald Mathias Ungers was, you know, closer to what we might call postmodernism, but he never fell in the traps of, you know, copying Doric columns or I don't know what from the ancient times. Now, he didn't do it. He was too serious of an architect to do that. But there is still something. I mean, you look at this tower. It's a tall building which has a massive part, masonry wall part, and then it has the glass part which is inserted in between the two. You know, if I can call them almost, well, the two sides of the building with blank walls on one side. It's a formal manipulation trying to negotiate between the democracy of glass and the imperialism, if I can call it so, the authority or the authoritarian attribute of the masonry wall at this scale, because it is an appreciable scale. I mean, you know, I don't know, 15, 20 floors, and then the glass prism. And here is a rendering of this giant building that he built, giant for Frankfurt, maybe for Manhattan, it would not have been really giant, but still it's a big building. Now, Constantinplatz in Trier, 1981, 1984, and if, for example, in 1982, Paolo Portoghesi was the first director of the first Venice Biennial in Architecture, and it was dedicated to postmodernism. So Oswald Mathias Ungers built this building, this plus square, exactly, you know, in those years when postmodernism was very, very appealing and very, very strong. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures, but I have pictures of this bibliothèque, I hope, from Karlsruhe. And here it is, an existing building, and then his own intervention. I don't think it's very gracefully done, but it's, you know, it's an architecture of intimidation, I would call it. You know, I regret that he left the language of negotiating with reality more fluidly, as it was shown in his first two houses. But this is a public building of a certain dimensions, and is what it misses is what Carl Friedrich Schinkel had, because if Schinkel would have used such a a big building, he would have brought in some sensitivity that was expressed through romanticism. Schinkel was an architect who married classicism with romanticism. But in the case of Oswald Mathias Ungers, with his modernistic language, the sensitivity that Schinkel showed in his architecture, even with classical paradigms, that sensitivity is absent here. And that's why the building is almost inhuman at the first sight. Maybe not just at the first sight. Yes, it is a serious architecture, but when playfulness is absent, I think an excessive seriousness could be detrimental. Yes, there are some good things, like here, references to the Pantheon, just like in the Altes Museum by Schinkel in Berlin, but the Pantheon was built by Agrippa and then by Emperor Adrian. So we are talking about two emperors, trying their best to conquer time through an incredible building that is called the Pantheon in Rome. Now here you have one modern architect, Oswald Mathias Ungers, and the 19th century Carl Friedrich Schinkel, also, flirting with the dome of the Pantheon in their own works. In my opinion, again, is that Schinkel was a little bit more convincing, but even here, I think in this work, Ungers shows his his talent, and it's not bad. What is bad is that the oculus that exists in the Pantheon, and through the oculus falls snow, rain. I remember one Christmas Eve, I went to the Saint Peter. I wanted to film, the arrival of Christmas in Rome, and I was very, very, very disappointed, because it was a red carpet event, and in my opinion had nothing to do with God. So then I went to the Pantheon in Rome, of course, and it was already close to midnight, and I saw some white things, small dots moving in the oculus, in the darkness. It was dark, but I saw white things moving there, and I didn't know what they were. And later I learned that they were actually white pigeons flying, freely in the, in the circle of the oculus. Here we don't have those pigeons flying freely. Here we have German rigor, German stringence, and we have what bothers me is not the cupola or the dome, because I think it's done very well. But what is happening underneath, it's so different from the Pantheon in Rome, and it's even so different from what Schinkel did at the Altes Museum. Just squares, small squares and large squares. Something is missing, and maybe what is missing is ornament. Ornament. Do you think the Greeks had no reason to, when they made the volutes, the orders are mainly differentiated, well, not only by the capital, but that is an important point in differentiation. You have the Corinthian, which is so flowery, and you have the Doric, which is so, austere, and in between them you have the Ionic. It's a play with nature in a way. Here, this is missing. We only have white walls. We have windows. Yes, there are also rectangular windows that are, narrow and tall, but everything else is based on squares. and no and no ornament. And I think that ornament would have made a difference. But 1986, former main building of the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Marine Research. Anyway, here it is. This building, I think, is convincing. I think what is remarkable about Oswald Mathias Ungers is that he avoided the trappings, the traps of postmodernism, the obsession with historicism, the obsession with, borrowing stylistic elements from the past. He didn't do that. There are maybe some references here, but rather to modernism, not to the past, not to the remote past. I think this one is a fine building. And it's also fine because it is like kind of like a boat, like a ship. So, the reference, it's narrative because it's a marine research, polar and marine research. So it is like a large, ship. In this sense, it is a narrative architecture. Without words, it's telling you what the building is about, its function. You see this boat here or small ship, and then you see the big ship, the building that he built, almost like a ship. What is this? In Berlin, I don't know what this is. Friedrichstraat Passage, maybe housing. 1993, 1996. At that time, the deconstructivism already stepped in. This, Friedrich, I don't know if it's on Friedrichstrasse, but it's Friedrichstadt. I don't know where this is I imagine there are there are buildings with blocks of flats. There are blocks of flats. But even here we see, and in a way, it's okay. It's Germany, it's Berlin, it's a strict architecture, which doesn't indulge in nostalgia, and maybe it's okay for Berlin and for that time. Maybe it doesn't have the purity of Mies van der Rohe's architecture, but Oswald Mathias Ungers was not Mies. Well, I guess I don't know what happens on the top, but on the first two floors, it's a mall. It's a mall with the madness of art, if we are to call this tower art, and it's commerce, capitalism. We shop, therefore we am. We are residents of the German ambassador in Washington, D.C. So this is not playing games. We are here working for the government, the German government in Washington, D.C. to me, this is a little bit deadly. I mean, it's you see where the absence of ornament leads. These blank walls, without I don't know, there is no negotiation between the building and let's say a blade of grass or the bushes or a flower. Even it's very, I don't know. It's from here it's maybe okay because it's an intermediate space between the house, the large house, diplomatic house, and nature, the park outside. So you have, what you have here is problematic. But here, because you also have the play with the shadows and the white columns, and there is the intermediate space between the true outside and the true inside, meaning the house. This intermediate space, like almost like a veranda in a way, and in this fact alone is a negotiation between the inside and the outside. House on, I don't know, no, I don't know German, unfortunately. House without qualities. I love the title. It's probably a reference to Musil's famous novel, Man Without Qualities. And to do a house without qualities is not easy at all. In fact, if you can achieve a house without qualities, there is a good chance you'll make a house full of qualities. Just as a man without qualities in Musil's novel had a lot of qualities. I like this house very much. Maybe you could say that there is something wrong with me. No, well, maybe it is something wrong with me. But what impresses me in this house is the level of surreality when reason is pushed far enough. This is, in my opinion, a surreal house, although it appears to be very rational. Yeah, in this picture, I'm influenced also in my evaluation, in my assessment also by the tree, of course, because the tree in itself is, an invitation to, the dreamlike nature. But I think the dialogue between the tree and the house is very potent because it amplifies in a certain way the qualities of the house and the qualities of the tree. But the house is an exercise in succinct aesthetics. I don't know, could we call it minimalism? I'm not sure, because even minimalism, if it is pushed to an extreme, it becomes the very opposite. Just as ice or snow appears to be hot when you first touch it, this so-called minimalism in its absoluteness, it becomes a maximalism, in my opinion. And you'll see the obsessional quest for the absolute, both in this section and also in the plan. Look at the plan. Is this a rational house? I would say it's rather irrational, although it employs straight lines and 90 degrees angles. But it's very pure in one way, but this purity somehow goes too far. I like this house very much because it is a house searching for the absolute, and it's crafted beautifully, and yeah, you could say you can barely breathe because it's so structured and so ordered, and everything is symmetrical. But it depends. It could be seen also, as I said, as a quest for the infinite somehow at the level through a house, at the level of a house. And at night or evening and during the day, the house becomes surreal. In my opinion, it is a surreal house. Closer to surrealism than to realism. Because who can say that the 90 degrees angle is the real angle? I mean, the angle of reality. And the 89 degrees is unreal. No, not necessarily. It depends. But in this case, I think the 90-degree angle is an expression of the quest of the architect for absoluteness. And the house is crafted, I think, impeccably in this sense. Look at it during the day with the oblongs open, and at night. And I think it's perfect. You could say, okay, it's perfect, but it's dry, it's frigid, it's sterile. In this particular case, I wouldn't be so sure. I think he did a good job here to create a mysterious house which appears to be totally rational or rationalistic. Maybe it benefits from the presence of that rebellious tree in the front, maybe, but I imagine seeing it even without the tree, and in my imagination, my evaluation remains the same. It's a very interesting house, and even you know, the plan itself, it almost becomes surreal, as I said, although there are the pieces of furniture there, but what is intriguing is this intermediate space, because you see is this depth here where he has actually enclosed, you see during the day. This is almost, I know I'm saying something foolish perhaps now, but I remember what Louis Kahn said, that in the old times, let's say in the Middle Ages, the wall was very thick and the light broke the wall or pierced the wall. And because the wall was very thick, in that intermediate space between the inside and the outside, light found its flesh, so to speak. And Louis Kahn continued. He said, the more we advanced in history, the closer we came to modernity, the world became thinner and thinner and thinner. So now the light doesn't have the chance to become flesh, to find its corporeality, if there is such a word, because the wall is too thin. And these days we employ curtains. But in this case, you see here, it's very deep, not because the wall is very thick, but because he created two walls. So we see them in just a second, sorry, in the plan here. I could almost venture to say that this is again an example of medievalization of modernity. I took some risk saying this, but because the building itself seems to have nothing in common with the Middle Ages or the medieval times. But because of this illusion that the wall is very thick, and in a way it is, it's not just an illusion. Well, it is, because it's not just one wall. There are two walls, and he incorporates certain things and functions, but that is wider than 1 meter. So that's why you get what you get when you look at the building here at the top. I think it's a very intriguing building and very interesting. I don't know if I explained well what I tried to explain, but it's one of his best works. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Hamburg, 1995. Well, this cannot be anyone else but Oswald Mathias Ungers. Again, is this a rational architecture? Not so sure. It's so perfect and so symmetrical that it becomes almost irrational. But you can take great pictures of it, even inside. You know, it's yes, squares, squares, but there is some kind of tornado of squares. I don't know how else to describe it. All these squares in the facade, in the interior space. It's a strange architecture in a way, you know. I mean, this is a big building, as you can see, a very big building, but also with some references to maybe not the gingerbread house, but to a certain kind of domesticity, because this kind of window, you know, divided in small squares, refers to, I don't know, windows or doors that were done not with a large piece of glass, but with a fragmented, I mean, made of small fragments, usually square. And it's his way, I think, of bringing ornament in. It's an oblique ornament. It's not an explicit ornament. It's yeah, maybe I can call it like this, an oblique ornament. And look at the building is huge. It's the Museum of Contemporary Art. And I don't know. There seem to be also apartments there, or I don't know what's going on there because so many little rooms you wouldn't expect in a a museum of contemporary art. Yes, there seem to be apartments, but then I guess the windows are. I don't see. I don't understand. There are no windows here at the top levels. Could it be that I'm not seeing properly, um, or could it be that this doesn't belong to that same project? Maybe it doesn't. Although it is a square and it has a square the courtyard, just like this. But where are the windows? Here there are windows. Uh, Maybe the first two floors belong to. I'm confused. I should have analyzed it more. In fact, I didn't analyze it before I ventured to make a presentation on the day when Oswald Mathias Ungers was built. But if I look at the picture with the building and I look at the plans, I'm confused. Maybe you are confused too. The fragmentations that are shown in the plan do not appear in the from the outside. But this is a typical, later work by Oswald Matthias Schungers. It's a building which infuriates almost with its symmetry, but it's skillfully done. You cannot say that this is a building you can easily ignore. No, no, it has power and it has refinement. And the inside is also, I would say, well crafted in its own way. It's architecture. Yes, it's not just building, it is architecture. Where is the art? Now, these plans look more like that museum, but what we saw with those apartments. Anyway, what's good with the internet is that, let's say you are interested in something, you can always plunge into the research, and you can discover mistakes in the presentation you attend, or you can develop more serious understanding of a certain topic. Really, we are lucky that we have the internet, because we can access so much information and learn so much by ourselves. We don't need professors and we don't need lecturers any longer, in my opinion, these days. 1998, 2001. I guess some kind. I don't know. I don't know German, so I should shut up. It's some kind of. I don't know. It could be an apartment building, or it could be some office, building some with offices. It could be both. Uh, it's okay. No, it's still architecture, but anyway. Oswald Matthias Schungers. Now another museum in Köln, Cologne, 2001. Um, the assault of art on society, or the assault of society on art. I don't know what to say about these museums. Yeah, I appreciate the art that I see here, but the museum itself is is a little bit intimidating. You know, is the house of art, or is the house which patronizes art? Maybe. Look at that huge blank wall. You know, it's a box. It's a white box. It's well done. It's well designed, but it's still a box. It's still traumatically you know, self-contained, and I don't know. I find it threatening. Maybe not so much from this point of view, because here you have the chance to also contemplate the old church. So, and also that shadow that is thrown, is the diagonal that the shadow provokes, is very welcome. So, but here it's something else. You know, here is a building which tells you stay away. Entrance to the ruins of a Roman bath in Trier, 2006. Is it architecture? Yes, it is architecture. Is it a crashing architecture? Almost, because of this regularity and this, you know, stubbornness, you know, Saxon stubbornness. I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. I mean, you know, we had seen buildings like this. We had seen architecture like this. It's in total opposition to the total fluidities or the fluid totalities of Zaha Hadid. But why not? We cannot just have buildings by Zaha Hadid. It would be an unbearable world. So I guess a building by Oswald Mathias Ungers is acceptable too. Especially again, like in the previous picture with the old church near the big container of art, which the museum he built was. Here we have these ruins, and then we have the his addition. Now this building, I also value a lot. And it's kind of similar to the one where I said that the rational becomes irrational or surreal. Look at this house. I venture to say that maybe even Andrea Palladio would have liked it, although this one doesn't have any sculptures, as many of the works by Andrea Palladio have. But its proportions, its rigor, it also benefits from the landscape, of course. It's another exercise in purity and idealism. Call it rational idealism, although it sounds oxymoronic. Look at the plan. We are going to see the plans in better pictures. So it's a villa. It's a villa in you know, with natural with nature around it. But look at this facade. I think is as perfect as a painting by Giorgio de Chirico. I consider it surreal, but it's also an exercise in following to the extreme the you know, the lessons of Renaissance, perhaps, in modernity. And we'll read a little bit later, in 1 minute, some words he had about this house. Again, he benefits here a lot from the landscape. The landscape is showing the other side of the world, you know, nature. The lake, the tree, the forest behind. And within this context, the pristine white villa. The interior also is very strict. Here he uses some columns, but they are, I think, very, very well assumed. And it's not easy to do something like this without falling in deplorable nostalgia. No, this is good architecture with quotations. Yes, some quotations, maybe even from Adolf Loos a little bit, considering the squares of the parapets. Yeah, again, we see integrated furniture or a presumed thickness of the walls, where actually he invited books to be received by those shelves. Perfect symmetry again. Everything is strict but elegant. This is Oswald Mathias Ungers. This is what he said. He said, I wanted to see how far architecture can be abstract. I mentioned the word ideal or absolute. It's about this abstractness. Therefore, there is a house without qualities. Again, he comes back to this theme, a house without qualities, no ornaments, no details, nor bottom or top. Everything has been subtracted to the absolute core of abstraction. More cannot be done. Let's read again. I wanted to see how far architecture can be abstract. Therefore, there is a house without qualities, no ornaments, no details, nor bottom or top. Everything has been subtracted to the absolute core of abstraction. More, in this sense, I imagine, cannot be done. This is the plan. I mean, the first floor. We are going to see also the second floor. 4 stairs, just like Villa Rotonda or Capra of Andrea Palladio. And, when I mentioned Palladio, I didn't think about the plan, but the building itself is very different, of course, from Villa Capra or Rotonda. But the 4 stairs kind of invite comparisons. That incredible villa by Palladio, which Goethe thought was the supreme house, the Architecture, the fundamental architecture, the house which opened to cosmos. Is this house open to cosmos? Well, in as much as possible in modernity, but it does have a level of purity and the strength of following an ideal. And I think it's a good building. And this is the second floor. Oswald Mathias Ungers. It's a big house. I mean, you see the dimensions of a door. It's a big house. But he handled it, I think, with grace. And this is not easy at this scale of a house. Sometimes I wonder, can't we do projects again like Andrea Palladio did? And maybe even like Oswald Mathias Ungers did for this house, meaning just a plan, a section, or several plans, several sections, no perspectival drawings, no perspectives, and no renderings. Nothing, just black and white drawings, Euclidean drawings, bidimensional drawings, nothing else. What about that? And actually, I read about 2 years ago that a student or someone from the faculty of SciArc in Los Angeles was contemplating for our time a return to Euclidean geometry and to bidimensionality. So I admire immensely the drawings of Andrea Palladio in the 4 books on architecture, where again he didn't employ any perspective, although he knew, I'm sure he knew, because it was invented at least 150 years before his time by Piero della Francesca and Filippo Brunelleschi. So perspective was already invented, created, but he didn't use it, with the exception of Teatro Olimpico, but they are not in terms of representation, I mean in terms of drawing, but in terms of construction. Maybe it would be interesting, you know, to return to a simpler mode of representation where we reject any kind of theatralization that renderings, you know, are so eager to, you know, employ. I think renderings do a disservice to architecture, because when you do a rendering, you try to be seductive. You place, you know, seductive human beings in front of the building, and seductive expensive cars, and these seductive tumultuous clouds on the sky, and seductive dramatic trees. So you don't know any longer how the building actually is. But with such drawings like the one we look at now, it's a different thing, you know. It is what it is. You get what you look at. You know, there are no disturbances here. This is the building. Architecturally speaking, this is the building. The house is a living space, laboratory, test, and representation of the idea of the world. Oswald Mathias Ungers. This very statement shows that he was, you know, questing for some kind of an ideal. You know, he didn't use the word ideal, he used the word idea. You know, laboratory, test, and representation of the idea of the world. So not just of the idea of the house, but the idea of the world. And this is the last work by him that I show, a pumping station. I plan to investigate what kind of pumping this is about, because I didn't understand, but it's an interesting building. Something a little bit, well, similar was built in London, near a famous building by Dennis Lasden, Sir Dennis Lasden. It's this red thing that I don't know what happened to Oswald Mathias Ungers. All of a sudden, the building became red. But it is impressive. I mean, it has still, you know, sketched diagrammatical geometry, but it is, it does have force, a primal force. And you wonder, why did he paint those two giant doors in green when the building is red? It means he was not against dialectics, and he was not against the circle of colors that his countryman Goethe talks so eloquently about. And he was actually who discovered, you know, the dialectics between red and green. For example, if you look intensely at a red spot, or a red something, a towel, something red, and then you move your eyes towards a white wall, you will see exactly the same thing, but green. How could this be? Because you looked at something that was red. Well, I guess there is something in our physiology that needs balance. So when there is an excess in one direction, there is something, sorry for being so unscientific or non-scientific, there is something that needs the opposite. So if there is red, you'll see green. So if you stared at these green doors of Oswald Mathias Ungers, and then you moved your eyes towards a white wall, you probably would have seen them exactly like they are, but red, not green. But here we have the redness in the building, in the walls, and in these impressive, I don't know, are they chimneys? You know, are they pumping fire, or what are they pumping? Whatever they are pumping, I think is an interesting building. Again, a little bit diagrammatic, a little bit, you know, infantile in its assuming geometry, but it's not a building that you could easily forget. Sorry about the resolution of this section. By the way of not pumping, but incinerators. Incinerators, I recommend you, I suggest to you to study the incinerators built in Australia by a very interesting architect, Griffin, who built a number of them, and they are very, very impressive. Also with very tall, well, in that case, they are chimneys. I don't know here what is the function of these vertical things. I see them above the well, at least on the right, the staircase. Maybe they are still chimneys. I'm not sure what they are pumping, but since it is a pumping station, I guess they are pumping something. Anyway, the redness itself is an event in the work of Oswald Mathias Ungers, and I guess, I don't know if you know, in European alchemy, apparently the main colors used are black. Well, it's not really a color, but let's call it, for the sake of this short presentation, black, white, and red. And apparently the alchemist begins the alchemical process with blackness or nigredo, and then he goes through whiteness or albedo, and in the end, he has to reach rubedo or reddening. So maybe in his own evolution, at his existential level and professional level or artistic level, maybe Mathias Ungers going through, I didn't see too much blackness, but we saw a lot of whiteness, albedo, and now at the end we see some redness, rubedo. And rubedo means life, means blood, means passion, means fire, means you know, in a way, assuming the impure side of life and burning it through without the fears of contamination and without the fears of you know, inhibition, and without the fears of becoming difficult to control. So I think redness in itself is a victory. And I don't know if this was the last building that he built. I discovered it only today, actually, although I had a presentation made 1 or 2 years ago. Whatever the case, it's the only building, well, not necessarily, because he used brick before, but not in this, with the earned, you know, strict geometry like we see here. This is almost, again, an Ur architecture. It's a paradigmatic architecture. It's a fundamentalist architecture, and its stringent redness, in my opinion, says, yes, I search all my life for the absolute. I search all my life for the infinite, and that infinite now I can afford to call it red, a red infinite. Anyway, that's about it about Oswald Mathias Ungers today. And I think this is the last image of this, I would say, interesting German architect. Thank you.